Good morning to everybody. It's a privilege for me that I have to be grateful to the organizers of this gathering and to be able to share with you, to listen carefully the arguments, the reasons that you have exposed, and feel myself well represented in this forum. I would like to tell you a part of the history of the country from where I come. My country is a small country located between Argentina and Brazil with 3 million inhabitants. A country with a different story about the rest of Latin America because its governors from the very beginning of the 20th century, they separated from church. Therefore, we have had a state with no official religion. We have a very high level of alphabetization, and we also count with a good distribution of wealth up to a few years ago, with a good cultural level, with a liberal trend from the very beginning. I would say that up to the 50s there was no corruption. Legislation on this issue did not exist, and the drugs are consumed. Well, socially it is accepted up to the 60th. During the 60s, in Uruguay, the elites of the population, we started consuming drugs, maybe because of the cultural revolution, that maybe in my country it had a different features. Guerrilla, and this led to a period of dictatorship period that many countries suffered in Latin America. They were prepared, unfortunately, from the United States, as it has been said yesterday. The U.S. Army, the repressive forces of the United States, they taught our police and our army to torture and to be cruel with the people. When the dictatorship started, we have had great people that made our constitution and human rights. However, we had never ratified the laws against drugs, and we had no legislation on that issue. In June in 1973, we had a sort of a civic military authorities, a sort of a council was formed. In 74, it was set to this council the ratification of the first convention on the United Nations summit. This is absolutely restrictive and repressive. I have had the opportunity to read the acts of that council. A physician, very conservative, was supporting that council with all the liberal tradition of the university of the country that were discussing with some other persons. You know that we have to say in our parliaments is yes or no. We cannot introduce modifications. This person that did not know that fact, he was discussing as a physician from the medical point of view that it was something terrible because there were very many drugs that were used and he could not agree that this could happen. Even with the most conservative people were suffering the repression of the popular movement. It was quite clear that this was it didn't fit with the purposes that were being followed. At the end of the 74, in November, we prepared a decree in which we deal a judicial frame to the treatment of the drug issue. All the legislation of Latin America, more or less at the same time, there was a follow-up procedure in the 70s about these legislations, and maybe ours has a little difference when compared with some others in Latin America, because the exception that this legislation has is beyond that. It establishes the state monopoly, and it has a chapter on the penalization and for the cultivation, but sets aside the consumer of such drugs. In other words, in the Uruguay, we do not punish the consumer. And this has been kept through time. We never touched this issue, was left that way. There was no very important consumers problem, and therefore they were years to inform the government so that the consumption of drugs and distribution did not exist because of fear and repressive methods. However, as soon as we retake democracy, we should say that there are 2 or 3 things that have followed this repressive behavior. We say that it is a democracy because it has a liberal feeling that ruled my country. But really, there was no answer, no response from starting with the democratic life. Moreover, the consumer increases when democracy starts. There, the distribution of drugs increases, and after so many years of repression in a country in which the population did not accept the dictatorship, as soon as we recover the democracy, all the adults start recovering the unions, government institutions, and all the adults were involved. Also promoting from the state the expansion of the number of registration in schools, university, were also centers in which drug was present. It was a different way of identity that were forbidden by the dictatorship. A difference was well marked in the way of dressing, and the adults were so busy in recovering democracy in our country.